A writer and filmmaker often acclaimed for his witty way of dialogue and handling of large ensembles is Joss Whedon. He also built up a passionate fan base with his television productions and became popular with the Comic-Con set. However, in recent years, his career has come crashing down as revelations about his behavior became public and even a lot of fans would turn on him. Whedon came from a television family, as his father was an Emmy-winning writer on children's shows and sitcoms, and his grandfather wrote on classic series like The Dick Van Dyke Show and The Andy Griffith Show, and even a few Disney movies. So it was probably not too hard for Joss Whedon to enter the entertainment industry. His first writing credits were on several episodes of Roseanne, and he also wrote 3 episodes of the short-lived series Parenthood. However, he longed to write movies, and wrote an original script about a cheerleader who gains the ability to fight vampires titled Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The script was passed around Hollywood, with 20th Century Fox eventually deciding to produce the film. However, the finished film was very different from what Whedon intended, turning his horror movie concept into more of a comedy. The script was changed to be lighter in tone, the ending was altered, and actors were allowed to improvise. While Whedon retained sole writing credit, he disowned the movie. Despite that, his original unaltered script helped garner him a number of screenwriting and script doctor jobs. One of the most notable was Speed. He contributed a significant amount to the screenplay, including a lot of the dialogue and even altering some characters. Graham Yost, the principal writer on Speed, and 20th Century Fox both thought Whedon was deserving of a writing credit, but the Writers Guild disagreed and his name was left off. He would also provide uncredited contributions to blockbusters like Waterworld and Twister, giving him a further first-hand look at how these big productions are put together. Among the fans of his original Buffy script were the folks at a computer animation studio called Pixar, who were preparing their first feature film, Toy Story. Joss Whedon was brought in to help with the script as Disney was assessing whether to move forward with it. He came up with quite a few ideas, both major and minor. Whedon created the character Rex, and he also helped reshape Buzz Lightyear. It was also his idea to have Mr. Potato Head's body parts work independently. A major sequence he helped write was the escape from Sid's house. He even tried to include one of his favorite trademarks, the action heroine, with him turning Barbie into a Sarah Connor type character who helped save Woody and Buzz during said escape. However, Mattel rejected the use of Barbie and the idea was discarded. Joss Whedon played an important role in helping make the script for Toy Story so witty and clever, although it was overall a group effort. The entire writing team, including Whedon, would even receive an Oscar nomination for Best Original Screenplay, the first for an animated movie. Whedon was eventually approached about possibly turning Buffy the Vampire Slayer into a television series, and he finally saw this as an opportunity to depict the characters and his universe the way he wanted. The continuity would even follow the events of his original script rather than the movie. The show was picked up by the WB network and became a hit, attracting critical acclaim and a devoted fanbase. The series was praised for its mixing of horror and fantastical plots with high school and later college drama, along with the chemistry between the actors and their witty banter. The success of the show even led to a spin-off series being produced, centered on the character Angel. This series would also develop a cult following and ran for 5 seasons on the WB. Despite his duties on Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, Whedon would still be brought in to work on some film projects. One you might be surprised to learn he had a small hand in was the direct-to-video sequel, The Lion King 2: Simba's Pride, for which he provided lyrics for the villain song. He also wrote the screenplay for Alien Resurrection, turning in multiple drafts, each one with a different ending. However, he was displeased with the finished film, blaming director Jean-Pierre Jeunet for not filming his script correctly. He also wrote a draft of X-Men, but only a few of his lines were ultimately used. That included Storm's infamous line about toads being struck by lightning, with Whedon blaming Halle Berry for making it sound so goofy. Honestly, something I've noticed over the years, that whenever something Whedon wrote or was involved with did not turn out so great, he always put the blame on someone else. He was never at fault. Whedon would also contribute to the script for Titan AE and was involved in early development of Atlantis: The Lost Empire, receiving a story credit even though he has said none of his material made it into the movie. Warner Brothers would hire him to write a draft for that Batman origin movie in the 2000s, but that script was obviously never used. Through his deal with 20th Century Fox at the time, he started to work on an animated musical version of Dracula, but it was never produced. He then got to work on a new science fiction television series for the Fox network titled Firefly. A futuristic show about a group of smugglers, the show was well received by critics, and with Whedon's Buffy success, you'd think Fox would have treated it well. Instead, they aired the episodes out of order and placed it on Friday night, often considered a death knell for a show like this. The show got terrible ratings, and Fox quickly canceled Firefly. However, the fan following started growing, and it became a big seller on DVD, which allowed viewers to watch Firefly in the intended order. Impressed with the show's dedicated fanbase, Universal made a deal to produce a feature film titled Serenity, with Joss Whedon directing and writing. While the movie was critically acclaimed, it was mostly fans who showed up, and it disappointed the box office. Nonetheless, he continued to be in demand in Hollywood. He guest-directed 2 episodes of The Office, and Warner Brothers signed him to write and direct a Wonder Woman movie. Whedon wrote a screenplay, but it was not quite what the studio was looking for, and he left the project. He would score viral success with his musical web series Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, with Whedon even receiving his first Emmy Award for the production. Surprisingly, despite his television pedigree, he has only received one other Emmy nomination for writing the Buffy episode Hush, ironically an episode where the characters are forced to communicate without talking. He would return to Fox for a new science fiction show, Dollhouse, but they would treat it about the same as Firefly. Dollhouse aired on Friday night and got low ratings, although Fox renewed it for a second season, mostly out of worry of fan backlash for prematurely canceling another Whedon show. In the end, they did end up canceling the series. Meanwhile, he would co-write with Drew Goddard the horror movie The Cabin in the Woods, which sought to satirize the genre's conventions. The movie went through quite a bit of trouble reaching screens due to MGM's financial issues. It was eventually released by Lionsgate, receiving strong reviews and doing okay at the box office. While that was going on, Joss Whedon was hired by Marvel Studios to direct The Avengers, with him also heavily rewriting the script. It makes sense why he was chosen, as he seemed to have a knack for stories of an ensemble of characters having to work together to solve a problem. Serenity also proved he could handle directing a movie with a lot of visual effects. The Avengers was released to massive success and critical acclaim, and Whedon would continue to work as a consultant on other MCU projects, including co-creating the television series Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., although his brother Jed Whedon and Marissa Tantron would serve as the principal showrunners throughout its run. Joss Whedon would return to direct and write the Avengers sequel Age of Ultron, but he had some creative clashes with Marvel during production. The film got decent reviews and was another hit, although there was some criticism directed towards his writing of Black Widow. It was also around this time that people started associating any quippy dialogue in blockbusters with Joss Whedon, which I've always found strange, as he was hardly the first writer to insert quips in big action movies. James Bond, Indiana Jones, and John McClane were using quips in dangerous situations well before Whedon became established. Meanwhile, Whedon was very active on Twitter, often using it to discuss his political views and typically with a snarky tone. Some of his behavior on there was rather unusual. I remember a few months before the release of Jurassic World, he posted a clip from the movie and lambasted the dialogue. He's obviously free to have his opinion, but it was strange to see the director of a competing summer blockbuster lash out at this other movie like that. He also had a habit of making remarks about famous women's looks, which is surprising for someone who is so often described as a feminist. Back to his film career, Whedon was brought over to DC Films, as Warner Brothers continued trying to expand their cinematic universe. He signed on to direct and write a Batgirl movie, but he dropped out, admitting he could not come up with a story. Several months before the release of Justice League, Joss Whedon was asked to provide rewrites and supervise reshoots. He would create a new edit for the movie without the involvement of original director Zack Snyder, although Snyder retained sole directing credit. It was obvious Warner Brothers wanted the movie to be closer in tone to the Avengers, and Whedon basically transformed the movie into a Frankenstein's monster, as it's obvious watching the movie there are multiple visions clashing. Christopher Nolan and Emma Thomas had executive producer credits on the movie, and when they watched the finished cut, they thought it was such a butchering, they told Snyder to never watch it. The critical reception was similarly negative, and when Snyder's preferred cut was released a few years later, it highlighted how much Joss Whedon changed the movie, often adding strange jokes to scenes and unnecessarily modifying scenes like Barry Allen's first meeting with Bruce Wayne. A few months before the release of Justice League, Whedon's longtime wife, Kate Cole, who he had separated from a few years prior and eventually divorced, wrote an article in The Wrap outlining that he'd used his feminist image and status of the creator of Buffy the Vampire Slayer to have affairs with multiple women and often acted counter to the public persona he presented himself as. This would send a bit of a shockwave through the Whedon fanbase, even leading to a longtime fan site shutting down as a response to these revelations. In 2020, Ray Fisher, the actor who played Cyborg in Justice League, called out Joss Whedon for being abusive and unprofessional towards the cast and crew of the film, with Gal Gadot and Jason Momoa backing him up. It was eventually revealed that Whedon even threatened Gadot. Whedon responded to this allegation by saying she did not understand him because of English not being her first language, which is a real a-hole thing to say. Warner Brothers started an investigation, and Whedon was eventually said to be walking away from his HBO series The Nevers, using the pandemic as his excuse. But I think it was obvious it was really the Justice League set reports that led to him no longer being involved with that series, which was ultimately cancelled after one season. The following year, Charisma Carpenter, who played the character Cordelia Chase on Buffy and Angel, revealed Whedon had been similarly antagonistic towards her and even fired her from Angel because of her pregnancy. The rest of the cast supported her claims, with Michelle Trachtenberg revealing there was a rule on set that Whedon could never be alone with her. Reminder that Trachtenberg was a teenager when she was on Buffy. Other people involved in those shows also spoke out about Whedon's behavior, and even his fellow writers, with him often getting into shouting matches. Since then, he's largely stayed low, with no new projects in the works. He has not received any credit since The Nevers ended its run, outside of his special thanks on a recent episode of X-Men '97. But that's likely because Marvel Studios often does that when they use a character someone created in the comics, and Whedon had previously written a few X-Men comics. Last year, it was announced that Hulu had ordered a pilot for a revival series of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. While Sarah Michelle Gellar would reprise her role as Buffy along with other cast members returning, Joss Whedon would have no involvement with this new series, although had Hulu chosen to pick up the new Buffy, they would have probably been contractually obligated to give him an executive producer credit, but that's about it. Of course, Hollywood being Hollywood, maybe he'll be put in charge of a new project one day. After all, even Scott Rudin is back to producing Broadway productions again. But for now, Joss Whedon has become a classic example of someone who let his ego get in the way of treating people with the needed respect, while he was once an in-demand writer, that does not appear to be the case anymore. It says something that I've noticed even longtime hardcore fans of his work, while still loving the characters and worlds he created, are not eager to defend his actions or let him slide. See you next time.